What is going on, everybody? My name is Tyler.psd, and welcome back to another Hearthstone video. Today we're going to be covering Tavern Brawl week number 2, and this week's theme is Banana Brawl. So, with that being said, what are the rules for this week, Banana Brawl? So basically, every time a friendly minion of yours dies on the battlefield, and vice versa with the enemy, you get one of 4 banana cards, and the 4 banana cards are as follows. So the normal banana, this is the one that Mukla basically gives you. It's just called bananas, and it's give a minion +1/+1. It doesn't have to be a friendly minion. You can also give it to the enemy if you so happen to need to. One example where a situation where you would need to give an enemy a banana is if it's, say, a 6 attack creature and you have a big game hunter, and it's your only way to survive is by buffing the enemy minion and then killing it with the big game hunter, for example. The second banana here, and this is where it gets more interesting, is called the big banana, and the big banana, instead of giving a minion +1/+1, gives it +2/+2. Hence, it's called the big banana. This is probably the most overpowered one out of all of them, or the strongest one out of all of them. I wouldn't call it overpowered, but if you get this one out of the 4, it's definitely the best one, so be on the lookout for these. The third banana is called the Dv8 Banana, and it basically acts like a Crazed Alchemist or the spare part. I forget which spare part it is. I think it's reversal switch, where you swap a minion's attack and health. So if a minion's 2/1, you swap it to 1/2, and so on and so forth. It's pretty easy to understand. And the last banana, and this one kind of breaks away from the chain of bananas so far, is called the Rotten Banana, and this deals 1 damage to anything. So whether it be the enemy's face, or spell damage, which we'll get into a little bit more later, or a minion, you could just deal 1 damage, basically. So, with that being said, that's basically the rules. Everything else as follows is basically the same. You create a deck, and this mechanic is played based on your deck and based on how well you use the mechanic to your advantage. So, next thing I want to talk about are the cards that best suit this week's Tavern Brawl. So if we go into the collection here, there are a bunch of cards that really work well and synergize with bananas. So the first of which is the cards that basically when you cast a spell or you play a card, it gets a buff. So things like Mana Addict, for example. Whenever you cast a spell, gain +2 attack this turn. So if you use Mana Addict and then you play a banana, whether on the Mana Addict or on something else, it's going to become a 3/3 or a 4/4 or 5/5 if you're giving it a buff, so on and so forth. It's basically a way to get a lot of extra damage output once you've played the Mana Addict and the turn comes around, and you can play a whole bunch of bananas, and that gives you more damage towards the enemy face, basically. One thing to look out for is comboing this with Warsong Commander in a warrior deck, so you can charge it up and then play a bunch of bananas, and there's a finisher for you. It's basically an on average of 5 to 7 damage finisher, so it's kind of like a better Leroy if you combo it with Warsong Commander, since it is a really cheap card. Now the next card that I want to talk about is Wild Pyro. So if we look here, every time you cast a spell, deal 1 damage to all minions. So if you don't have any minions on your side of the field, or you just want to clear the board, say their side of the field is a lot stronger than your side of the field, then using 1/1 bananas and 2/2 bananas on Wild Pyromancer gives you a pretty decent board clear, especially if the enemy doesn't have many banana buffs on their minions, or their minions are relatively small but they have a bunch of them. And you're going to find out that there's a lot of that in this week's Tavern Brawl, since the mechanic is once you die you get something. So you want to play a lot of small minions with not too many health points, I guess. So Wild Pyro definitely comes in handy if you can use it right. You can basically put this in any sort of deck, but it works best with constructed decks that use it already, such as the Priests, so on and so forth. So that's kind of cool. The next card that we're going to talk about is Violet Teacher. So Violet Teacher is whenever you cast a spell, summon a 1/1 Violet Apprentice. Now this works really well with the bananas because this card basically screams value. If you put this thing into some sort of Miracle Rogue deck or a Token Druid or something like that, it's definitely going to be played, and the value that you're going to get out of it is a lot more than for a 4-mana card. So for example, you play a Violet Teacher, you play 2 bananas, you basically turned your card into a 5/7 plus 2 1/1s. So basically for 6 mana, you're basically getting a 7/9 card, which is good because you're spreading it out between minions as well. And of course, you don't have to buff the Violet Teacher. You can buff the tokens that come off of the Violet Teacher as well. And that way they don't die to things such as Whirlwind, 1 damage spells, pings, and hero powers, things like that. So Violet Teacher is definitely a really good card to put in most decks in this week's Tavern Brawl. The next card I want to talk about is similar to this card, and if it was still 5 mana, it would probably be the most overpowered card out of everything on this Tavern Brawl list, but it is Gadgetzin Auctioneer. So everybody knows this card from Miracle Rogue back in the day when it was 5 mana. It did work basically. So what this card is whenever you cast a spell, you draw a card. So if you have a whole bunch of really cheap costing spells, especially in a Miracle Rogue deck or just a Rogue deck in general, because Rogue's specialty is a whole bunch of cheap spells, then you can cycle very, very quickly through your deck. And now that you get 1-cost spells all the time with every deck that you use, no matter what deck it is, this card can also be played in basically everything to produce cycle in your deck. So you don't have to put too many cards in that draw you cards, and instead you can use him in the late game to refill your hand, so on and so forth. So Gadgetzin is a very good card as well. Next card, Gazlowe. Now this one's an interesting one because it has not seen basically any play at all in the current meta or since it's been released in GVG. In ranked play, casual, it doesn't even see play at all in arena because obviously it's a legendary card, so you're not going to see it. And there are a lot of better legendaries that you'll probably end up getting in arena anyways if it ever does come up. But basically what this card is whenever you cast a 1-mana spell, hence every banana spell there is, they're all 1 mana, add a random mech to your hand. So what does this guy scream? This guy screams value, ridiculous value at that, because by the time you get onto turn 6, you probably stockpiled 3-4 bananas at the very least, and 3 to 4 mechs plus a 3/6 creature is unbelievable for the amount of value that you can get out of Gazlowe. So Gazlowe, hands down, is one of the best legendaries to play to synergize with the bananas and things like that. So those are like the cast a spell cards, so on and so forth. It's kind of cool mechanic to play around with. It works really well in Miracle Rogue and Token Druid, like I said, and we will get into that a little bit later as well. So the next concept that I thought I would share with you guys is being able to counter the enemy's bananas. Now, how are we going to do this? We're going to do this with Trogs, with an S, or just Trog, I guess. So there are 3 types of Trogs, and 1 type of Trog spawns another type of Trog. And basically what it is when the enemy casts a spell, the Trogs get stronger. So Stone Splinter, which is a 2-mana 2/3, whenever your opponent casts a spell, gain +1 attack, is basically an early play that you can put on the board and counter the enemy from playing his bananas. It's not as strong as the other 2 Trogs, obviously, but it does get the job done with it basically becoming a 3/3 in most circumstances unless it's removed right away. So that's kind of cool. The second Trog is the Burly Rock Jog Trog, and this one's a little bit better, becoming a 5/5 after 1 spell from the enemy is played, and it goes up by 2 attack every time. So it's a 4-mana 3/5 whenever your opponent casts a spell, gain +2 attack. And a 4-mana 3/5 on its own is a pretty good stat line, like I said, on its own. So getting insane value out of the enemy playing spells is definitely some value in this through the banana mechanic in the Tavern Brawl this week. So the third Trog, and this one is a little bit more expensive because it's a legendary, is a 7 mana 6/6. Whenever your opponent casts a spell, summon a Burly Rock Jog Trog. So every time the enemy casts a spell, whether it be a banana or any other spell that they're using, you're going to spawn one of these guys. And these guys don't stay as a 3/5 either. So if they play 2 bananas, you're going to spawn a 3/5, and then the second banana is going to spawn another 3/5, and this is going to become a 5/5, and you're going to have the 6/6 body from the Trogzor on the board. So as you can see, it spirals out of control really quickly, and if the enemy's deck relies on casting the banana spells, then they're basically screwed if you get one of these or all of them down on the board at the same time, especially this Trogzor. Alright, so that's kind of cool. The next little class or sub-genre that I want to talk about with the new banana mechanic is the buff cards. So what I mean by this is things like Echoing Ooze, where it's a 2 mana 1/2, where you summon an exact copy of this minion at the end of your turn. So if you play banana on this and it becomes a 2/3, then you get 2 2/3s effectively. And the cool thing about this is if a minion has died and you play this, you basically have a 3 out of 4 chance of getting good value out of it, because if you get the regular banana, you're going to get basically a 2 mana 4/6 minion. And if you get the +2/2 banana, you're getting even more value out of that buff. And also, if you get the Dv8 Banana, you get 2 2/1s instead of 2 1/2s, which are effectively better at clearing minions and things like that. So it's basically a win-win-win-lose, unless you get the deal 1 damage banana. So hold on to this card basically until you can get some value out of it, and then play it along with a whole bunch of bananas and things like that. And other buffs, obviously, we're going to talk about a priest deck later that will utilize things like this and make them very useful. So another card such as this one is Questing Adventure. It's got the same mechanic to it basically, other than it doesn't split in half. But whenever you play a card, gain +1/+1. So when you play a card such as a banana, you gain +1/+1, and then you gain another +1/+1 on top of that because of the card's mechanic. So basically a +1/+1 banana turns this into a 4/4, or a 5/5 with a +2/+2 big banana. So as you can see, this is also a spiraling out of control effect, where you play it for 3 mana, you waste a whole bunch of, or not waste, you play a whole bunch of bananas on top of it, and suddenly this thing is a 10/10, and the enemy can't deal with it unless they have some sort of silence or big game hunter, things like that. So you can also play pretty smart with this and make it like a 6/6 so that they can't big game hunt it. So the only way that they can clear it is by either trading or using a silence of some sort. So Questing Adventure doesn't see any play in the current meta, but it will see play this week with the banana mechanic. The next couple of cards that are decent at every deck that you can play are the eggs. So as you know, with the release of Nax, there's Nerubian Egg, which has seen a lot of play in the current meta just because it's a good card overall, as long as you have activators. And with bananas as activators, since you get a lot of them, this is basically turned this card into even more of a monster than it is, because you can get the Nerubian out much quicker. Now there is another egg that was added with Blackrock Mountain that doesn't see anywhere near as much play in casual and ranked, things like that, and that's a Dragon Egg. So whenever this minion takes damage, summon a 2/1 whelp. So this thing is pretty much the go-to 1-drop for every deck. You should have this card in your deck if you're playing Tavern Brawl this week. It's extremely value eccentric, because even 1 banana brings us up to a 1/3 for 1 mana, plus you get an average of 1 to 2, maybe even 3 2/1s off of the egg, especially in such a thing as like a Mage deck where you play this turn 1, you ping it turn 2, and then you buff it up more, ping it again, so on and so forth. So it's pretty good. It's hard to say how well people are going to adapt to this by the end of the week, but for now, basically, I say you should play it in every deck that you play. Along with this, the Dragon Egg and the Nerubian Egg, you need to buff them to activate them. There is another card that was released with Blackrock Mountain called Dragonkin Sorcerer, and this is a 4 mana 3/5 dragon. Whenever you target this minion with a spell, gain +1/+1. This is another card that should be in basically every deck that you build, because bananas effectively turn into +2/+2 spells, and big bananas effectively turn into +3/+3 spells for 1 mana. So you can see how much value that you can get out of such a thing like this. And if you have more cards, such as Priest does, that give buffs to your creature, then it gets pretty out of hand pretty quickly. And there's a Priest deck we're going to talk about in a bit that uses things such as this, as well as other cards, to get the maximum value out of them. And basically it's an OTK when you get this minion big enough, and so on. So that's basically it for the main minions that I would choose to play in almost every deck. There are a few honorable mentions that I want to mention as well that somewhat work but don't really work. The first is Emperor Thorson. This is probably the best honorable mention, I guess you could say, because when you get bananas, you're basically going to try and combo the bananas in, since they're such a cheap spell, and a lot of people are running combo decks right now, which we will get to again a little bit later. I'll show you a couple combos that you guys can use to advantage. At the end of your turn, reduce the cost of cards in your hand by 1. So effectively, the bananas spells that you get, that you have in your hand at the end of the turn, not the ones that you get after you've played the guy, unless he survives till the next turn, effectively cost 0. So great for combos, great for combo decks in general. Even in the current meta without bananas, it's good for combo decks, so you can see how well it's going to work here. So that's probably the best card out of the honorable mentions that I had to pick. The next card is Flesh Eating Ghoul, and this is a 3 mana 2/3 that whenever a minion dies, gain +1 attack. And since you're trying to kill minions, it's obviously going to get bigger and bigger. And on top of that, if you kill your own minions and you buff this guy with a banana, it's really hard to kill, and it does a lot of work, gets a lot of value really quickly on the board. So it's also a common card, so you guys that don't spend too much money on the game or haven't played it for very long, you guys can put this in basically every deck for this week's Tavern Brawl. The next card is the Stone Skin Gargoyle. This is a little bit weaker card. It's at the start of your turn, restore this minion to full health. So with 4 health and some buffs, it does work. A 1/4 isn't very good for 3 mana. That's actually a really terrible stat line if you guys haven't noticed already. But once you start putting buffs on this card and it regains health every turn, unless they can trade into it effectively, you're basically going to get a pretty big tempo swing as long as you play this and buff it right away. So play this turn 4 or 5 where you have at least 1 or 2 bananas that you can throw onto this guy, and then the next turn when it comes around, it's obviously going to regain its health and to be able to trade really good with other minions. So that's Stone Skin. One other card that I found to be useful here and not in the actual meta is Grim Patron, for basically any deck that you want to play, and that's because you can use the Rotten Banana to get yourself more than 1 Grim Patron. Now obviously this is a little bit clunky because you're not going to get the Rotten Banana as often as you'd like, because it's a 1 out of 4 chance, but buffing Grim Patrons is also a very good thing, since not being able to clear these with spells, especially at 5, 6, 7 health, they can get really out of control, and it's basically impossible to clear these guys once they get up there in health. So Grim Patron, really good to use in every deck, not just in Patron Warrior like the current meta is right now. Another mechanic that I can talk about here is how many bananas you give to your opponent. So if you're looking to give your opponent bananas in a deck such as the Trogs deck that I was talking about earlier, you want a card that gets better as the enemy hand fills up. Now, I'm not talking about mill, even though this is run in most mill decks, or some mill decks, I guess. What I'm talking about is Clockwork Giant. And it's a 12 mana 8/8 that costs 1 less for each card in your opponent's hand. And it is a mech. So if you wanted to do some sort of mech rogue or mech deck, I would definitely include this one in it for Tavern Brawl. Because most of the time, your enemy has a lot of cards. Well, most of the time, both players have a pretty decent amount of cards, especially decks that don't normally have a lot of cards in ranked and things like that will have a pretty exceptional amount of cards, more than usual, in Tavern Brawl this week. So if you can get 6, 5, 4 mana Clockwork Gnome on average, then you're getting pretty good value out of it, since it's a big body, and a lot of people aren't running too much removal these days because they just play a whole bunch of minions. So you're gonna get a pretty valuable card for trading, especially out of a Clockwork Giant. Now, the last card that I want to talk about is another card that I found to be up there as far as honorable mentions are, and that is Loatheb. The only thing about Loatheb that sucks is it's only a 1-turn effect. And to be completely honest, a 6 mana banana or a 1-turn stop of a banana isn't very relevant, although it is relevant against things such as the mill decks and the tempo mages, which everybody is playing right now. So depending on how the meta develops in Tavern Brawl this week, it depends on whether Loatheb should be played in every deck. Right now, I would put it in most decks, just because it counters the current meta so well, and it's also just a good card in general. And we've discovered that since it came out in Nax, and it's still seeing a lot of play today. So that's the one other card that I would think about putting into my deck if I had room for it. So now I want to talk to you guys about the decks that are the most viable in Tavern Brawl this week. So there are certain decks that shine over others, but there are a pretty decent amount of options that you can go for as far as viable decks and decks that you'll win with most of the time. Now, by far the best deck so far in the current meta is Tempo Mage. Now, the reason for this is because you got cards like Flame Waker, which is a 3 mana 2/4. After you cast a spell, deal 2 damage randomly split among all enemies. So you can combo this with things like, say, 1 mana spells, Arcane Missiles, Mirror Image, and then you can also put Mana Worms on the field to gain extra value out of the spells that you're playing. And it turns into a board clear or a lot of damage to face really quickly. You play the Flame Waker, which every time you cast a spell, plus a banana, plus another banana, plus another banana, you're doing 6 damage across the board. Plus the Flame Waker can trade with 4 health very favorably. So that's probably what's carrying Tempo Mage right now, along with Mana Worm, things like Sorcerer's Apprentice, which makes all the bananas cost 1 less, so 0 while it's on the field, and just the unlimited amount of spells that you can basically play with Mage these days. Another good card in Mage to use is Spellbinder, which is when an enemy casts a spell on a minion, summon a 1/3 as the new target on your side of the board. So if somebody casts a banana on their own minion, you're going to end up getting a 2/4 minion, and the banana is not going to affect the enemy minion either. So that's kind of cool, and it could become useful, as you can see, especially if the enemies don't have too much on their board and they're trying to make some sort of trading play, and that basically messes up the game plan right away. The other card that's really good with bananas is Archmage Antonitis. A cheap 1 mana spell that does something and also gives you a fireball, plus you get a 5/7 body out of it. We all know that this card is very useful in Mech Mage, and it's the same concept. You play it, cheap spells, more fireballs, cycle, so on and so forth. The only thing that's a downside right now is a +1/+1 or +2/+2 isn't as effective as a stealth spare part where they can't kill your Archmage Antonidas. So on average, you'll get less fireballs off of bananas than you will off of spare parts, unfortunately. It is still good, but Flame Waker is definitely better. Another cool thing to consider about a mage deck, whether you want to play it as its own type of deck or you want to try and incorporate it into the tempo mage, is cards like this. Dragon's Breath. Deal 4 damage, cost 1 less for each minion that died this turn. So, obviously, since the meta in Tavern Brawl right now is aiming to build a deck where you have a lot of minions die, so you can buff your minions more with bananas as your minions are dying, something like this will get great value. 4 damage for 3 mana, 4 damage for 2 mana, 4 damage for even 1 mana or 0 mana with Sorcerer's Apprentice is pretty good value, and I would recommend using something like this if you're running into a lot of paladins, for example, or just mid-range aggro decks, things like that, where there's a lot of minions going to the death pile really quickly, and you can get value out of this. The other card that's kind of similar to this is Volcanic Drake, which is a neutral 6 mana 6/4 that costs 1 less for each minion that died this turn. So if you can get a 3/2 mana Volcanic Drake for 6/4 stat line that's a dragon, then it's definitely value. And as you can see, Druid also has another card called Volcanic Lumber. Same thing, taunt, costs 1 less for each minion that died this turn. So you can see where that's going. You can get a lot of value out of cards like that, especially in Tavern Brawl this week, which is kind of cool. Now the next subclass or the next decks, set of decks, subclass, subgenre of decks that work very well with bananas is just aggro decks in general. So things like Face Hunter, where you can charge up a whole bunch of minions, such as Wolf Rider. As you can see, 3/1 charge becomes a 4/2 charge for 4, which is basically the same thing as Arcane Golem. Arcane Golem, not Arcane Golem, except it's 4 mana, but it doesn't give the enemy a mana crystal. So as you can see, the combos are very heavy with this, and Face Hunter definitely benefits from bananas. If you thought Face Hunter was bad in the ranked play, it's even worse in this week's Tavern Brawl. Things also like Zoo, which uses the eggs again, like I said, Nerubian Egg, and other charge minions also benefit from having the bananas, because things like Doomguard, which is a 5 mana 5/7 with charge and discards 2 random cards, may discard things like bananas, which are useless when discarded, rather than discarding something like a Mal'Ganis if you're playing a Demon Lock, or discarding something more important to having your deck, because you can always regain bananas, but you can't bring back to life the really good card that you just discarded. So another aggro deck to look out for right now is Aggro Pally, and using Divine Shields on things such as the Shielded Minibot, which is a 2/2 with Divine Shield for 2. If you buff an Argent Squire, a 1 mana 2/2 with Divine Shield, or just buff it even more than that, then it gets pretty crazy really quickly at the start, and you can normally combo in a pretty decent start with Aggro Pally way more than you can in the ranked play for this season, with the current meta being Face Hunters and things like that. It's just not fast enough in ranked play, but with the banana concept and things like that, you can get a lot of stuff out there really quickly, and then you can use things such as Divine Favor to refill your hand based on how many bananas and things that the enemy have gotten as well. So you can play this very, very smart, and Aggro Pally definitely works in this week's Tavern Brawl. So the second last deck that I want to talk to you guys about is what I call the buff or OTK Priest. So basically what this priest entails is having a minion, not having it die, having it grow like crazy, and then having it hit for a whole bunch of fucking damage right to the face and killing the enemy. So basically what this deck wants to do is stall, 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 heal, stall, heal, stall, bam, one hit kill. Hence OTK, one turn kill. So what this deck entails is things such as high, I guess you could say, high health minions that you can combo with things. So things like Lightwell or Death Lord, which has 8 health, comboed with Divine Spirit and Inner Fire to make it, say, a 16-16 or 32-32. Work really well and provide for OTKs. Now, other cards that you can use with this deck are Shade, so which is a 3 mana 2/2 with stealth. At the start of your turn, gain +1/+1. So you play the Shade for 3 mana. You play a whole bunch of bananas on it, buff it up. The enemy can't kill it unless they have AoE, and you basically hit them in the face for a billion because it's constantly growing. And they use things like Power Word Shield as well, which gives your minion +2 health, and other buff cards like Velen's Chosen, which is give a minion +2/+4 and spell damage +1. Basically makes it unlimited to combo up to killing them. Unfortunately, this is a very slow tactic, so at the time being, it doesn't work very well because of how the meta is in such an aggro standstill at this point. Even Temple Mage can be considered aggro because of how fast it outputs damage with Flame Waker and Bananas. But if you play cards that heal you up or taunt or stall, I guess you could say, such as Deathlord, like I said, or Belcher's, which is a taunt that summons another taunt, or things such as Healbot, or just health, because you can say health, that restore health, Alexstrasza, Antique Healbot, then you can stall basically long enough to keep that Shade on the board and keep it growing. I wouldn't recommend using this deck if you want to win every single game, but it's definitely a fun concept to play around with. Now, the final decks that I wanted to talk about are the mill decks that people are playing right now. And I don't have it, but what these decks basically consist of is a card called Lorewalker Cho. And it's basically a 2 mana 0/4. Whenever a player casts a spell, put a copy into the other player's hand. Now, this can be comboed with things such as Gang Up, for example, which is a 2 mana spell that chooses a minion and then shuffles 3 copies of it into your deck. So if you play Lorewalker Cho, shuffle 3 copies into your deck, keep playing Lorewalker Chos, you can basically lock the enemy out from gaining cards, and just ridiculous amounts of mill goes on. And you guys probably know about Mill Rogue, using things like Cold Light Oracle, which is each player draws 2 cards, burns the enemy cards, you're playing extra cards, so you're not burning any of yours, and you can basically stalemate them up until the point where they lose from fatigue, because you're gaining more cards by putting 3 of each card into your deck than they are, and they're going to be much further ahead in fatigue than you are by the time that you run out of cards. So that's definitely a way to play this week's Tavern Brawl. It's very effective at this point, just because if aggro decks and combo decks can't get the cards that they need because they have too many bananas in their hand, then they're not going to be able to win, obviously. So, with that being said, you can also play one other mill deck, which is very viable in today's meta, and that is Druid Mill. Now, Druid Mill is the less popular, so what it basically entails are things like playing Mukla itself, which is what was expired, or what inspired this week's Tavern Brawl. It's a 3 mana. I don't know why there's a little glitch there. It's a 3 mana 5/5 that gives your enemy 2 bananas. So you fill up their hand a little bit more. Again, you can combo this with things like Clockwork Giant. So you fill up the entire enemy hand, and then it's a 2 mana giant that you can throw down as well. And Cold Light Oracles. And Cold Light Oracles to mill the enemy. You can basically come up with things really easily. Another concept that a lot of people like to play in the mill druid decks is basically every card that gives the enemy cards. So you use things like Dancing Swords. Get off of crafting, come on. Dancing Swords, which is a 3 mana 4/4, which is a good stat line, and it gives your opponent a card draw. Now, if the opponent's hand is already full, you're not going to give them a card draw. You're actually going to kill that card and send it straight to the death pile. Plus, you're getting a 3 mana 4/4 minion. You can also use Mechanical Yetis, which give the opponent a spare part, which fills up their hand with a 1 mana spell. And you can also use, what's the other card? Where's the Druid here? You can also use Grove Tenders, that's the card, which is choose one, give each player a mana crystal, or each player draws a card. And obviously you're going to draw a card. So you're going to draw a card, and they're not. You can also use things like Naturalize, which is destroy a minion, your opponent draws 2 cards. Again, you can mill the cards if the enemy's hand is full. So Mill Druid definitely came a little bit more viable in this week's Tavern Brawl than in the current meta. And it's also just a really fun deck to play around with. I just like mill decks, period. A lot of people might say that you can use Mage mill decks, which work well as well, but with Tempo Mage out there so broadly, and with how good Tempo Mage is, I would never bother really using a mill Mage deck. So that's basically it, guys. That's all the decks and cards and mechanics for this week's Tavern Brawl. I hope this was a little bit informative for you guys. I hope you guys are going to get a little bit more fun out of Tavern Brawl this week, because you're going to win a lot more from this information that I just gave you. And I hope you guys just get lucky, because RNG sucks these days. And I don't know, Hearthstone's just supposed to be fun, and I think that's what the developers did when they put Tavern Brawl in, was to hope that it would make it a little bit more fun for players that don't like to play ranked and casual and be super competitive all the time. So yeah, so that's basically it for today's video, guys. If you want to subscribe to the channel, I'm going to be doing one of these videos every week, covering each week's Tavern Brawl. And yeah, so I will see you guys later.
Bye-bye.